And so in order to do that, we need to somewhat uh, time when those avalanches happen. And we need to be able to trigger those avalanches when the roadway is closed and there's no people or vehicles in the way. We can trigger that avalanche and then clean up whatever debris is left over. Um, yeah, and that is really the goal of why we're out there triggering avalanches and starting avalanches is we want to be able to somewhat predict the timing of when those occur.
Well, Stephen, this involves a new way to handle controlled avalanches in some areas in the state of Utah. And I guess, first of all, I'm sure a lot of people outside the state are wondering, why does the state start avalanches?
Sure. Um, so in a lot of western states and mountain areas, roadways travel through steep mountain terrain that get a lot of snowfall, and those avalanche paths can naturally can naturally trigger and impact an open roadway. So the goal of our DOT program and DOT avalanche programs in general is to basically prevent avalanches from crossing an open roadway. And so we do that with, and so in order to do that, we need to somewhat uh, time when those avalanches happen. And we need to be able to trigger those avalanches when the roadway is closed and there's no people or vehicles in the way. We can trigger that avalanche and then clean up whatever debris is left over. Um, yeah, and that is really the goal of why we're out there triggering avalanches and starting avalanches is we want to be able to somewhat predict the timing of when those occur. And so, through a long history of avalanche forecasting, we've come to understand things about snow science and weather patterns that um, lead to the development of increased avalanche hazard. And we kind of have those typical avalanche areas mapped out, and they come from known locations. So it's actually, of all the natural hazards, it's one of the only ones that we can kind of really control when the destruction happens. Certainly at a certain point, certain storm systems and snowpack conditions are too hazardous that we just have to kind of step back and let a storm system run its course. But for the most part, we're able to kind of forecast when those conditions are going to happen and do mitigation work when needed.
And I've seen a lot of various videos of avalanches out west, and it just seems to me like a lot of the roads out there, and probably just because the land is level, but they're down at the bottom of a lot of these valleys and canyons where the land is flat, which makes them kind of a target for this, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so in a lot of the roads, especially in Little Cottonwood Canyon here in Utah, the roadway is actually in what's called the track of the avalanche path. So it's actually where the avalanche is still accelerating, and that's so the roadway was historically built as an old mine, a railroad that was pulled up and down with mules. So they needed the gradient of the roadway to be as kind of consistent as possible, and so in order to do that and keep it up out of the creek bottom, and they kind of cut the road right through a lot of these big avalanche paths. So that's one of the reasons why Little Cottonwood is so prone to avalanches.
Now, of course, we're talking here today about the new method for triggering these avalanches, but I was kind of fascinated by the old method you've been using. Can you describe that?
Sure, yeah. So, historically in Little Cottonwood Canyon, we've used various methods to trigger avalanches. The one that people think about most is we've used military artillery of various types to, from a fixed location, we can shoot war surplus ammunition to trigger those avalanches. So currently, we're using 105 millimeter howitzers to do that work. We don't own the weapons; we lease them from the U.S. military. The U.S. military does all the maintenance. They control what training protocols we do with that equipment. And so the artillery is an incredibly effective tool. Um, there's a couple issues with artillery, which is kind of the big reason to move away from artillery is uh, the ammunition we're using is made to fragment into hundreds of pieces and thousands of pieces. It's designed to kill people. So when we, in a lot of the areas where we do avalanche mitigation work are also places where people want to go ski recreationally. And so if you're happen to be in a closed area at the wrong place at the wrong time, you could get hit by that fragmentation. The other issue in Little Cottonwood is that there's a lot of buildings and people and hotels and resort infrastructure. And so we're actually firing live live artillery shells over inhabited buildings with people inside of them. And that's the only place in the country that's doing that, not in a war setting. So that was the big push for UDOT to start this implementation of a new technology to reduce our dependence on artillery. So we'll still be using artillery in some locations, but largely we've eliminated over 95% of that overhead building fire with this new mitigation technology.
Why don't you go ahead and describe this new system? What are the various components that make it up, and how does it work?
So it sort of falls under this umbrella type of equipment called a remote avalanche control system. And there are a couple different types and styles. One is a gas-based system, so something that combines oxygen, propane, or oxygen and hydrogen to create a pressure wave. And then there are explosive-based systems, so that whether they launch a projectile into the snow or they hang an explosive projectile over the snow. Those are the kind of the two different types. UDOT has both types. This system that we installed this summer on Mount Superior, it's an explosive-based system. It's called a Wyssen system, a Wyssen tower, Wyssen. And so what it is it's essentially it's a 30 meter or it's a 10 meter tall tower or 30 feet that it looks similar to what a ski lift tower, if you know what that looks like. So it's got a ladder on the one side, and on the top of this tower, it has a kind of a special mount and then what it gets placed on top of that is called a deployment box. So in the deployment box, so that tower is kind of constructed and lives up in an avalanche starting zone permanently. So it just stays there. And so what gets set on top of it is called the deployment box. And so that gets loaded with 12 explosive charges and then gets picked up by a helicopter and then set on top of that tower without any people having to be actually on the ground to do anything. And so once that deployment box is mounted on the tower, we can remotely connect to that equipment and start a firing sequence when we need to. And so that's kind of the high level version of how that equipment works. And so it's a very effective method. It creates a very big area of effect, so we can have fewer pieces of equipment to cover the same amount of area. Historically, we had had like over 30 howitzer kind of target locations, whereas we're kind of covering that area with 16 of these towers. So it's about as minimal of a coverage as you can get in that piece of terrain.
Well, and you mentioned that some of these systems do use projectiles of some kind, but I would assume they're non-military and they don't fragment.
Exactly. Yeah. So this explosive system it's a commercially available system. It doesn't have the fragmentation issues. So if someone happens to be in the wrong place, we certainly go to great lengths to not have people there, but we don't have to worry about the fragmentation issue, and then we don't have to worry about the potential for an artillery round to fly short of its target and hit a building.
Okay. I know that a lot of agencies, when they look at new systems like this, they'll conduct a cost benefit analysis. Um,
Sure.
did your department do that? And how did the cost compare with the benefits?
We certainly did a cost benefit analysis. Unfortunately, the artillery it by far and away is a cheaper system. Um, we've been very lucky to have very reasonable maintenance and operations costs with that artillery, but the safety risks really sort of far outweighed that cost savings component. So these systems that we installed are much more expensive to especially this initial installation cost. And I would say, when we first put in our artillery mount locations, building those buildings was quite expensive. So it's somewhat similar. The annual operating cost is probably going to be like 30 or 40% more than what we have been using with that artillery. Um, but it the safety benefits of this system far outweigh the added costs, and it justifies it.
Okay. I wonder if you can give us an idea of where this is being deployed, not only the name of the place, but kind of for people that aren't familiar with the state's geography, kind of what highways are passing through the area, what is the closest town, and so on.
Sure, yeah. So we are the Unit Avalanche program is, in Little Cottonwood Canyon and Big Cottonwood Canyon. It's in the Salt Lake Valley, so we're only it's I want to say it's like 30 miles as a crow flies away from the state capitol in Salt Lake Valley. So we're very close to this very large uh, metropolitan area. I think there's over 2 million people that live in the Salt Lake Valley now, and so the canyon, Little Cottonwood Canyon, it's an east-west oriented canyon. The Salt Lake Valley is kind of a north-south oriented valley, and then I-15 runs through the center of Salt Lake Valley. And in Little Cottonwood Canyon, this roadway is called SR 210. And so it's a big, nice glacially carved kind of U-shaped canyon. And so it has really, really steep sides, and then it has this kind of nice, gentle kind of valley bottom. And there's two ski areas located at the top of this canyon, Alta and Snowbird ski areas. So that's where most of the people who are coming up the canyon are going to those ski areas in the wintertime and to recreate on various national forest landscapes, to hike or bike or whatever they want to do. So that's kind of that general orientation. Most of the avalanche areas are kind of right in that kind of Salt Lake Valley, Wasatch Front area, but there are some avalanche areas in the center part of the state, near I-70, and then farther south than that, near like the Arizona border in St. George.
Are you treating this as a test, or have you already started to look at other places you might put a system like this?
We really see these as um, ways to eliminate our use on military artillery. There are areas. So the one issue with putting these systems in other places is that in locations that is a designated wilderness area, so a designated wilderness area by the United States government, basically that has a lot more restrictions on what type of activities happen there. And so right now, the wilderness rule basically says that you can't install any kind of man-made infrastructure in a wilderness area. And there are exceptions around the country to that, but in general, like new construction generally is not allowed. And so right now, we still shoot our artillery into locations that are wilderness areas. We have it's part of our special use permit to do that. But in order to, if we really had to fully get away from artillery, there would have to be some kind of major legislative change to the Wilderness Act to be able, or we would have to get some kind of legislative exemption to put that equipment there. So certainly some other locations we're looking to implement this equipment, but right now we've gone, we're very much invested in this equipment now. We've kind of been slowly implementing these systems over the past 10 years. And so, yeah, this system that we put in this summer is the last big area for Little Cottonwood. And so we don't have any plans in the near future to install any more of these systems.
Okay, great. Well, Steve, that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem.